turn it over to you, Barbara. Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Barbara Kelly, and I'm the Executive Director of the Hearing Loss Association of America. And I wanted to come today to bring you this special message. You know, we're going through a really tough time right now with the pandemic, and hearing loss is isolating enough. And now we have another layer of isolation in front of that with social distancing and the self-stay-at-home orders. And we just want to be here to bring you as much online content as we can. We have a section on our website just on COVID resources that please check out at hearingloss.org. We have recent information on if you're hospitalized as a COVID patient, what you need to do. We have a guide for medical professionals. We also have information about if you're teleworking or if you're a student who's taking online courses, what you would need to know. And we want to keep adding to this, and we want to stay connected to you. And that's why we're bringing you webinars like this. And these are free, they are open to the public, they're captioned, and they are supported by your donations. So if you can make a donation, that's great. I understand it's a really tough time, but please stay connected with us. And thank you for being here. Our presenter today is Dr. Michael Harvey, and he's a clinical psychologist who specializes in people with hearing loss. And I first met Michael Harvey in 1990 at an HLAA convention. He was presenting a workshop. And since then, he has just provided so much wonderful content for our magazine, at our HLA conventions, and he's in private practice. And he not only understands hearing loss, he knows the human spirit. And I have to admit that after I read one of Michael's articles or attend one of his webinars, I feel better. So I feel really good turning him over to you today. So thank you for coming, and please stay connected with us and check our resources out at hearingloss.org. Michael, I'm going to sign off now, but I'm going to be here. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure being here.
Michael, you've got the remote control now, okay?
Okay. Let me see if it works. Yes, it does. So, coping with the coronavirus part 2. This is going to be not a lecture per se. I'll lecture for maybe 10 or 15 minutes, but I really, really would appreciate the comments that I got last week on the webinar were wonderful. I'm going to review those, but please be thinking of comments or questions, and we'll get to that in a couple of minutes and post them on the Q&A window. But let's start with some light humor. Humor is a good coping mechanism. The recent online dating profile. So the plan. First, we're going to examine together the growth-enhancing parts of this horrible trauma. Last week, we talked a lot about coping with the negative, and we hear about the negative every day, as we should, because we need to keep ourselves safe. But people are also talking about the benefits of this unavoidable crisis right now. So we'll talk about that. And I'll share some of your uplifting comments from the last webinar. And most of our hour together will be a discussion via the Q&A window. So please, 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 while I'm talking, think about and post in that window about ways that this awful, terrifying pandemic that we wish would end now, nonetheless has benefited you. Because if we share those insights with each other, we can all survive a lot better. So the sneak preview, this is a slide you'll see in about 10 minutes again. What are the positive influences of the COVID-19 virus regarding our identities and what we want for our lives? And they could be anything, desires, intentions, beliefs. What are the positive influences of this pandemic on who we are, who we deem ourselves to be, our identities, and what we want for our lives? So let's start with another horrible event in our history. In World War II, there was a war crime called the Bataan Death March, which involved the forcible transfer of over 80,000 POWs over 80 miles. In World War II, thousands and thousands and thousands of people died, got beaten, got abused. And I came across a quote from a POW veteran that, I don't know, I still don't quite understand. And maybe all of us together can scratch our heads and use this pandemic as a way of understanding how on earth this veteran could have said the following, quote, 50 years after surviving the Bataan Death March and his subsequent 42-month internment as slave labor camp as a POW, a 70-year-old veteran was interviewed. He stated that he would not repeat his experience for $1 million, but recalled them as the most enriching, ennobling experience of his entire life, unquote. That sounds, I don't know about you, a bit unbelievable, but nonetheless, it was this man's experience. And maybe we can kind of, again, scratch our heads together on the Q&A board and begin to make sense out of this quote, and therefore some of the benefits that this horrible pandemic offers to us. So that's what we're going to do today. I'll start the discussion with a couple of stories. You know, I recommended last week, and I always recommend to people, get together online. But I never really realized personally how amazing it was. So my wife and I had 8 people over for dinner. And you see them on the TV set right over here. We did it via Skype. And, you know, after some initial kidding around, you know, like I offered to help the host wash the dishes and clean up, et cetera, et cetera. After some initial chit chat, we had a discussion amongst the 8 of us how this is for us, both what we're struggling with, our fears, what we're learning, the realizations we got. And, you know, afterwards, the hostess said, you know, this was fun. I said to Rhonda, with frankly a tear in my eye, Rhonda, this was more than fun, this was healing. This was healing. So have a dinner party online. It is quite amazing. That's story number 1. And I'm going to shut up in about 5 or 10 minutes, and please be posting your comments on question and answer board. The other story, which happened, I guess, a week ago. So my wife and I are in Florida quarantine. We've been here 2 months. We'll probably be here for 2 more months. We're snowbirds, at least this year. And she fractured her bottom left molar tooth, which I have, for your benefit, a picture of over there. I'm not sure if that's a molar, but, you know, bear with me. And, you know, we had to find a dentist, a local dentist. I couldn't sleep. I had all these visions of, do I drive home? How? Da-da-da-da-da-da. So 9 a.m., I call some friends here. Do you know of any dentists? Yes, we do. I call one, and they're closed, only for emergencies, but someone answered the phone. The next question she asked me, is she a current patient? Of course, the answer was no. And of course, I knew what then would come. Well, I'm sorry, we can't see you. But instead, she said, can you get here in 10 minutes? And not only did he see her right away, he had to leave for an appointment all day. He called Friday night at 6 to have her come down so he could extract her tooth. It took him 1 hour, ended at 7 p.m. Friday night. She had to come back because she was in pain. He saw her on a Sunday. And, you know, I was tempted to ask the dentist under his shirt, does he have angel wings? But instead, I simply said, thank you very, very much, because this helped me restore my faith. And there's some good people in this world, and we find these good people typically during crises. We find other kinds of people too, unfortunately, but we find human angels during crises. So that's my story, among others. So let me read to you some of your wonderful comments from the recent webinar. And I want to thank you for them. And again, please continue, because we're going to examine more today. Quote, I am in self-isolation and have never felt so free. Listening to the birds, watching growth in the trees, etc. Also smelling the flowers. Another comment, many times in this busy world, I have said, I wish the world would stop or slow down just for a little while. Well, now it has, and I can catch up and enjoy a certain peace. Isn't this interesting? You know, the peace doesn't take away the terror and the fear, the anxiety. It exists side by side with it, right? But we are invited to experience the good stuff along with the yucky stuff. Forgive the psychobabble. In raising my 9-year-old granddaughter, we are trying to make this a candemic, a learning opportunity. She is journaling, and we are going to revisit this in a few years. Much to learn. I started enacting an hour of quiet time with my 6-year-old daughter today. We do our own thing for an hour. She said she liked it. Just a suggestion from my experience, someone else writes. I've been FaceTiming with my grandkids, ages 3 to 6, and we've discovered that scavenger hunts are great fun. They ask me to find things, so to reverse scavenger hunting is good as well. Another comment, most of us with hearing loss are in a better position in these trying times than so many on their best day. Maybe people without hearing loss will know what it's like to suffer from isolation. If situations become more restricting, I'm prepared for it. I'm ahead of the curve. So this is an interesting comment, isn't it? Because the isolation that Barbara noted that comes from hearing loss is for this particular person, and I hear this a lot these days, prepares one for the isolation that comes with this pandemic, and that preparation helps one with one's fortitude, one's strength, one's resilience. You know, been there, done that. I have experience with that. This is not new. Interesting, huh? Couple more. I struggle to understand how some in power believe money is more important than life, and that some people, grandparents, disabled, non-wealthy, are expendable. That attitude makes me more afraid of our world than the virus. So this person benefit had to do with kind of realizing the, I don't know if you want to call it evil, you probably do, or the non-compassion in this world. And I talked with people later about this, and invites them to make a difference in this world to help that not happen. My daughter was saying the other day that when she hears, you know, stories like this, how certain people don't care or are being insensitive, it invites her, as she put it, to give back to the planet somehow. So this pandemic has helped some people define certain purposes, goals, passions for their life that maybe they would not have found otherwise. One hearing impaired person in my practice said, initially I was resistant to the 6-foot social distancing rule because I was afraid of hurting the other person's feelings. But I've come to realize that it's okay to put myself first. Now, this is kind of incredible, isn't it? This person, like many of us, have been non-assertive. I don't want to cause you pain. I don't want you to feel bad. So I'm going to put all my needs second and yours first. And she was very, very resistant to asking people to stand back 6 feet. But you know, when it came to the fact that if she doesn't do that, she is putting her life at great risk, she has learned to not only request, but to require people to stand a social distancing, safe distance. And she would say, she told me the other day, she'd say to people, I am sorry if you feel I'm being antisocial, but here's why. I hope you understand. And she said to me the other day, if they don't understand, it's too bad. It's their problem. It doesn't have to be mine. So this pandemic, which is awful, scary, and we wish it would go away, helped this particular person and many other people learn, practice, honor, assertiveness skills. So let's introduce a framework for our comments, which I'm not sure I mentioned this. I hope you're posting them in Q&A. I think I probably did say that once or twice. There's a very important concept in something called narrative therapy, which is called a double story. And it has to do with what therapists used to do, I don't know, 20 years ago. When someone's been through a traumatic experience, therapists might ask, tell me more, tell me more, tell me what happened, tell me what happened. Then the hour would be over and the patient would go home. Now, what that does is cause more harm because the person is only recounting half the story, what happened, how they were victimized. But nobody is completely passive to negative circumstances. When people cannot prevent the yuckiness that's happening to them, they take steps to modify its effects on their lives, depending on their values. So the double story that I would like to talk about with you more and hear from you more is the first piece of the double, if you will, is what happened or what's happening. And if you don't know about that, which I'm sure you do, obviously, just listen to the news for 5 minutes or 5 seconds, you'll know what's happening. But number two, how we respond to it, how we hold on to or try to hold on to certain values throughout the circumstance, certain values which are precious to us and important. I just heard a story of a family who was dealing with the circumstance, so the what happened. Their double story is they started to play board games together. They started doing puzzles together. They laughed together. Stuff that they hadn't done, this other family hadn't done in a long time, but that's what they did to hold on to their values. So the double story is what we are going to be talking about today. And it's this double story that helps us emotionally survive. You know, we'll physically survive by keeping distance, wearing masks, you know, being careful, blah, blah, blah. We will emotionally survive and I think benefit by focusing on the double story. And values, of course, can be almost anything. This is a long list of values, but you know, anything can be a cherished value. So another way of saying roughly the same thing, but I am going to keep my promise and shut up soon so we can have a discussion. But when events touch us in a meaningful way, inevitably we are psychologically transported somewhere. Hence the expression, I'm moved by what you're saying. I'm moved by such and such. Exactly where we're moved to may be to a bunch of places. Past events, our life predicaments or life joys, conversations that we've had or will have, thoughts about actualizing our own values. And you know, when you ask somebody a question, if you look at their eyes, sometimes the eyes will gaze upward. They're going somewhere. It's called internal transport. And where they're going depends on a bunch of things about the person. And we too are internally transported somewhere with the COVID-19 pandemic. Well, so, I would really appreciate hearing more about where your mind goes when you're thinking about the COVID-19 pandemic. Why? Why are we drawn into particular aspects of the pandemic? What's your individual, unique reason for going to a particular place? What is it about your own life work that accounts for why certain parts of the pandemic strike a chord for you? So these are all the questions. How does it emotionally affect us, particularly the double story of how it benefits us? So we now go back to the slide I previewed for you a while ago. What do our responses mean about who we are and what we want for our lives? Our desires, life intentions, preferences, beliefs, hopes, personal qualities, values, strengths, commitments, plans, characteristics, abilities, purposes. What do our responses mean about who we are and what we want for our lives? So I think I'm done lecturing. So please continue posting on Q&A. And I will, just for sake of conversation, I'll read the questions or comments. Maybe we'll talk about them. We can't have a discussion amongst all of us for internet connectivity reasons. But please post. So let me get to some of the comments. Excuse me. The first comment, I think that surviving extreme difficulty and all that requires, some of which might in the abstract feel like it might be impossible, but turns out not to be, proves to us just how strong and skillful and resilient and human we are capable of being. That's an amazing comment. Thank you so much. We don't realize how strong we are until we're tested. I've heard people say this all this week. I found strength in me I never thought I had. So this is a very important comment. And, and this is kind of a weird free association, but when I first took a cross-country trip, I looked at a map and, it had some of the highway sort of dotted lines, unconnected lines. And I said to myself, how could a car go over a road that's not connected? It turned out, of course, when I was on the real road, it was all obviously connected. But it's I don't know, forgive the weird place I just went, my internal transport. But we don't know our strength often until we're in a situation that shows it to us, that requires it. We didn't want to be here. We wish we can get out, but here we are. Another comment, is this where we type the comments? Yes, it is. In the Q&A section. I'm passionate about running and afraid to go out to do that now. What did I hear about running the other day? I don't run anymore because that's where I'll find the bodies from Law and Order. It's a funny line. Listen, I'm not a physician, but what I'm hearing, and you have to ask your doctor, what I'm hearing is exercise like that, running, for example, outside is a wonderful thing to do, provided you do it by yourself. You don't do it in groups. But, talk to your doctor. The thing that many people, if not all of us people, us human beings, get caught up in is when we're scared, we become immobilized. We're afraid to do anything. That's what this comment makes me think of. We're afraid to go outside. We're afraid to laugh, we're afraid to bathe, we're afraid, you know, we sort of just stand still and shiver. And in fact, we need to do things, keep busy, including exercise, as we talked about last week. So to kind of acknowledge our initial sort of hesitancy and mobilization, and then with medical guidance, get out and do things, exercise is a important thing. But I get it. Initially, we're scared to do anything. I just saw a wonderful lecture by an internationally known psychiatrist on trauma. His name is Bessel van der Kolk. V as in Victor, A-N-D-E-K-O-L-K, who basically said in a nutshell, the most important thing we can do in this traumatic time of ours with the pandemic is to keep busy, to have routines, to exercise at certain times of the day, and to structure our lives. And I think later you're going to see the link to the webinar that we did last week, in which we talked about, for example, Nelson Mandela, who was imprisoned in an 8 by 7 foot cell for 17 years. The way he described that he emotionally survived that ordeal for 17 years is to exercise at certain times of the day, to structure his life, to do things at the same time in order to divide the time so he wouldn't, in his words, go crazy. So yeah, I think it's normal to feel afraid to do anything, to go out, but barring medical advice to the contrary, it's an important thing to do. But next comment, but I found more motivation to work alone out inside, to work out alone inside. Yeah, people are setting up their own individual exercise corners of the house, meditation corners of the house. I told the story of last week about the woman who was so proud of herself because she finally got around to alphabetizing her spice rack. Another comment, I'm still not sure if it's a big risk or not to run outside. Again, I'm just a psychologist. Ask your physician. He or she will know. Okay, another comment. In 1955, I started an engineering degree. I thought by 2020, we would have flying cars, but not teaching people how to wash their hands. It's a very interesting comment, isn't it? The $64,000 question is, why are some people not washing their hands? Why are some people ignoring the repeated guidelines of for God's sakes, don't congregate in groups? I don't know the answer to that, frankly. But it certainly speaks to how often, I forgot the exact quote, but science sometimes is ahead of human common sense or human wisdom. People do know how to wash their hands. Why don't many people do that? I would love to hear some of your thoughts about that. I don't know. Please continue commenting. This is wonderful. It's helping me anyway. I'm enjoying this very much, and I appreciate it. My mind goes to the limited number of years we have left in life, being older. The pandemic feels like it will remove or diminish considerably the next 2 years of life or longer. Then I know I have to learn through this, be strong, maintain hope, and use all my resilience. It's difficult. Well, that's right. That's right. The yucky part of mortality is when we are faced with it, when we know our life might soon be over, or someone we love, their life is over. My wife died of cancer 5 years ago. And during the time she was dying and after she did die, some of my life was absolutely not stressful. I no longer cared whether I was stuck in traffic on Route 128. Because for God's sakes, my wife just died. Who the heck cares if I'm stuck in traffic? We learn through facing our mortality and that of others not to sweat the small stuff. Now, would we like to learn that lesson another way? You betcha. I think Woody Allen or someone says, if pain builds character, please God, give the character to somebody else, not me. But we don't have that option. So we're faced with the what if. And the benefit in that, alongside the sadness, depression, anxiety that goes with that, the benefit of that is that it invites us to articulate what is really important in life, in our life. It's not important that I was stuck in traffic. What was important was what happened, and relationships, love, family, that kind of stuff. So, that's right. This is kind of making us scared. And the negative part of that, again, is quite obvious. We all know that very, very well. What it does invite us to do is to formulate, articulate, specify our values, and not living under the adolescent or young adult illusion that life will go on forever. I think I mentioned last week, one person said, I haven't talked to my father in 20-something years, but I don't know how much time he has left, or I have left for that matter, so I'm going to call him tonight and tell him I love him. Okay, next comment. I have learned that I'm not as antisocial as I thought I was with this pandemic. I enjoy my alone time, but I also miss interaction. I realize that I'm much more worried about my fellow man than I led myself to believe. Lots of laughs. That's very interesting. It's kind of like my experience when I was having that dinner party online. I think I'm sort of an introvert as well, but I really, it was surprising to me, and rationally it shouldn't have been, but it was, how much I not just enjoyed, but really it fed my soul to interact with people. And the other thing people are saying is we're having different kind of conversations, sometimes more intimate conversations online, video chats than we had in face to face, because we don't have the distraction of life. We don't have going to a restaurant, talking to the waiter, listening to other people's chatter, returning food. We have just each other to talk to. Excuse me. I have a 4.5-year-old and almost 6-month-old. My husband and I are loving working from home because we're not missing any of their milestones. We get to see them all firsthand. It's a wonderful comment. People are appreciating family more. People are saying, I wish this would end, but I'm enjoying being home. I'm enjoying being with my kids. I'm enjoying being with my husband, my wife. My job was getting out of hand. It was the tail wagging the dog. Now I can breathe. I can sit there. I have all this time on my hands with people I love, who love me. And this is great. It's a common comment. Hello, the hardest part about this situation is having to leave a job I enjoy and not knowing when I'll be able to return to it. I am left wondering how the clients I was working with are doing. I was temporarily laid off. Now I'm trying to keep busy and joining webinars like this to focus on learning and seeing the pandemic. I am slowly getting to see the pandemic. Yeah, people leave the familiar and are invited to see other things, including what benefits there are to this awful time that we would like to end as soon as possible. These are wonderful comments. Thank you so much. I find comfort in knowing that there is a transition period and what I'm feeling is normal. Yeah, that's kind of important, that we all have these feelings, and many people feel that their particular feelings are not normal. And the good news about openly sharing feelings, particularly under times of stress, when we're typically much more honest with our feelings, is we realize, gee, this is not just me. This is a normal feeling. This is something people feel, and it's very validating. I am grateful for COVID-19 shedding a bright light on the crucial need for accommodations for people who are hard of hearing, especially people who are in hospital settings. The absolute need for equal access accommodations have long been in the dark. More than 30% of our senior population are navigating hearing loss and are tragically being impacted by COVID-19. Accommodations are needed for effective communication for the many. For the many, hard of hearing needs can no longer be invisible in every tragedy. Let us see the lessons and the gifts. Yeah, this is highlighting everybody's needs, in particular, the accessibility needs of people who have hearing loss. And as Barbara Kelly said in the introduction, there are postings on the HLAA website and others about accessibility issues, ways to advocate, etc. Maybe people don't want, okay, someone just answered the question. Maybe people don't wash their hands because they aren't taking scientists seriously. They think that they can build their own immunity, is what I'm guessing. I had a professor like that. Yeah, many people think, science does not apply to me. Unless it says, Michael A. Harvey, you need to wash your hands. Mike Harvey doesn't need to wash his hands. And maybe called the narcissism of 2020, who knows? The other thing this pandemic is teaching us, though, is our vulnerability. In other words, it's sort of like on September 10th, not 9/11, but the day before, many people had this idea that the ocean protected us from the bad guys. And of course, now we know the ocean doesn't protect us from the bad guys. And there was this feeling of vulnerability that overcame the nation on that day of 9/11 and after. And it taught us that we should, be on yellow alert and all this other stuff. And again, this idea that it applies to everyone. Interestingly, just to compare 9/11 to today, as all of us recall very vividly, we're all very connected after 9/11. We had this one fear and common enemy that united us, and it lasted for a while. And similarly, this is the same invitation with COVID-19. We have a common enemy, and people are, on the whole, much nicer to each other. The wonderful phrase that everyone is saying, please be safe, stay safe, be safe. It has a very special meaning now than it did a month ago. Okay. Is it normal for such a time as this to resurrect old fears and anxieties? The answer is yes. Well, one more thing. I worked so hard to overcome, and it feels like the rug got pulled out from under me. Having a lifelong hearing loss seems to make me more sensitive to isolation. Yeah, this is kind of important. When we have a trauma or something bad happen and we grieve, the mythology is we come to a point of acceptance. Now, by mythology, I mean it's never as simple as we accept it's gone, the fear's gone, and we move on. It's normal as can be to, quote, accept the loss, the fear, whatever, but every once in a while, the fear gets triggered and it comes back and we feel like we never made any progress. The good news, though, is it lasts a very brief time, and then we get back on track. But there's absolutely nothing abnormal about current fear, current trauma, triggering old trauma, old fears. It's not only normal, it's inevitable. Now, let me give you an example, then I'll talk about the amygdala. Can't wait for that, huh? An example is this guy who went to Vietnam, came back, had therapy for post-traumatic stress disorder, was doing very, very well adjusted, professor. 30 years later, he was in bed, heard thunder outside, and found himself getting ready to go into combat position looking for his rifle. Obviously, the sound of the thunder triggered old memories of bombs in Vietnam, and he reacted accordingly. And soon afterwards, he realized, he told himself, this is not Vietnam, it's Boston, Massachusetts. And he then regrouped, and was fine. But that is an inevitable reaction. Things trigger old fears. Now, when you have old fears that are heavy-duty ones, that are traumatic, they're stored in a different part of the brain. Normal memories are stored in the cerebral cortex. Traumatic memories are stored in what's called the amygdala, A-M-Y-G, amygdala, A-M-Y-G-D-A-L-A, which is part of the limbic system. And the reason that's important is the amygdala has no sense of time. So when we remember stuff, trauma that's stored in our amygdala, it feels as if it's happening in the present tense, hence a flashback. There's an article in some neurological journal, I think its title was something like The Takeover of the Brain by the Amygdala. It's when the amygdala takes over the brain and makes us think that the fears or the trauma are happening again. And what I advise people to do is give your amygdala a name, George, Sally, doesn't matter, and say, George, I'm busy now. You're only the amygdala. It's not really happening now. You're trying to make me believe it. But the COVID-19 pandemic certainly will trigger old fears, anxieties for us. And when, not if, but when that happens, first step is saying, I'm still okay. I'm not I don't have mental illness because I'm thinking that this is normal. And then remind us, our amygdala, George or Sally, that we're not back there We're actually in 2020, in fact, focusing on a pandemic. One person writes, this is profound, I like this. Remember, intelligence is limited, but stupidity is unlimited. That's probably, this probably has to do with why certain people don't wash their hands or getting together in huge groups on a beach as if to say it won't happen to me. Actually, I may use that in an article, thank you. Next comment. As a hard of hearing person who lip reads, it is hard to hear people wearing masks while they are standing 6 feet away. Yeah, this came out last week too. This is the time that texting might be a good idea. You know, that there's a book that criticized people who text all the time. The book is called Reclaiming Conversations. And I'll never forget when my poor daughter, who was 22 at the time, called me bawling, crying because her boyfriend of many, many years broke up with her via text. Can you imagine that? And, you know, not terribly uncommon in today's climate, but sometimes texting is very, very useful. And when people are wearing masks that prevent lip reading, this might be the time to text or pass notes or something. My mind goes to me or my spouse being in the hospital alone. I get really frightened by this sometimes. Other times I realize how much my faith carries me and makes it okay that I'm not in control. I also feel so much gratitude for my family. There's a theologian named Paul Tillich who had a phrase, doubt is the essence of faith. And by faith, I don't mean religious faith necessarily. Doubt is the essence of faith. Let me explain that. Let's say it's sunny out, sunny right now outside of my window. I can look outside. I cannot say I have faith that it's sunny because I can see it. It's empirical. It's a fact. I can say I have faith that I'll be alive after dinner. There's a very, 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 very good chance I will, thankfully, but it's not a fact. So when we have faith, whether it's religious faith, spiritual faith, or just plain, you know, I think it's going to be fine. It's one way of navigating doubt. It's how we manage doubt, by having faith. And again, spirituality, belief in God is one of many ways to exercise faith. It's not the only way. So this is not, I'm not in any way implying that any particular spiritual path or any spiritual path at all, for that matter, is a necessity. And again, this woman or man echoes, I also feel so much gratitude for my family. You know, isn't it easy to take people we love for granted when everything is going just fine? You know, it's only when things aren't going so fine that we say, you know, I really appreciate my family. I appreciate my kids, my wife, my spouse, my partner. Another comment. My employer sent employees home for flex place through online work and connectivity with coworkers. We are following guidelines. The gift, as a caretaker for my spouse, I found life-work balance. And deaf people who use ASL are already equipped to communicate using our visual language electronically. My work has remained productive. At the same time, my spouse and I have reduced a great deal of stress. Even though she lost her job, we are able to smell the roses. Yeah, it's a wonderful, wonderful story. Thank you for that. It's very hard to smell roses when we're too busy working and putting out brush fires on the job. Thank you for that. Okay, in isolation, 3 weeks now. I have accepted that I have no control over the virus, And there is nothing I can do to help anyone other than to stay isolated and have moved into survival mode. Dissociation from the enormity of the situation has ensued, empowering me to function in my own small world. Working within the new parameters of my life gives me stress-free control and freedom to be me without any external pressures. It feels pretty incredible. Yeah, this is actually quite important. When I came to Florida a couple months ago for vacation, I brought a book about how to use my new Nikon camera, which at least it seemed to me then and still now is incredibly complicated. You know how many pages I read in that book on my 2-month vacation? None. So once this pandemic started and I stayed home and didn't go out walking the beach and doing all these things, I'm starting to read about focusing, apertures, f-stops, et cetera, et cetera. It invites all of us, meaning the pandemic, the opportunity to ask ourselves, who am I? What do I want in life? It takes away the distractions. Thank you. That's a very important comment. I understand having a regular schedule during this time is important, whether it's exercising, eating right, working, talking with others online, learning and keeping yourself busy. But during such a time with having anxiety and low self-esteem, it can be difficult. I used to calm myself by walking, but that's no longer an option. What are your tips to motivate yourself at times that you feel like you can't go on? Well, 2 thoughts. First, again, ask your doctor, but walking is probably a very good idea, pending medical guidance. Just walk alone, don't walk in groups. A very important principle, what's called dialectical behavior therapy, DBT, is feeling opposite action. By that, it means don't wait till you feel like doing something. Do it because your head tells you that you will feel good doing it. So if you feel like not walking or not doing something that's good for you, do the opposite. I don't feel like walking. I don't feel like riding my bike, but therefore I'm going to do it because I know in my head it's good for me. I know there's a cliche, do what you feel, follow your heart, follow your gut. And it's often right, but not always. Do what you feel, unless what you feel is not going to be helpful to you. In that case, follow what your head said you should do. Can't think of other examples right now, but motivation is overrated in the sense. Okay, I think I said enough about that. I have found if I do things for others and think outside of myself, it really helps. For example, I got a note in my mailbox asking if I could join in the efforts to make it fun for neighborhood children during their daily walks by putting a certain picture in the window each week for their scavenger hunt for that week. Last week was flowers. This week it's butterflies. So I'm having fun making butterflies to display in my windows. Next week, we're off to musical notes. So if this is terribly important, then we didn't even get to discuss this yet. We help ourselves incredibly by helping others. There's a lot of literature about this in terms of what's called facilitating contribution. If we contribute to the betterment of other people's lives, it feeds our soul as well. And this is a tailor-made opportunity to do that. One person wants to know, who is the author of Reclaiming Conversations so that I can look it up, please? All I can tell you about that book, this is how I encode data. It has a white cover with blue letters. which probably won't help you find it. I'm sorry, but that's all I can tell you. But that's the title, so go online and you can easily find the author of that. And finally, we have a comment, and again, I welcome more, but this is the last one here. One aspect of my experience makes me both laugh and feel sad. Both my wife's and my parents are gone, and we are glad they do not have to experience the effects of COVID-19. And yet we are so happy to be alive and looking forward to seeing our grandson again. It's part of the changing of the generations. Yeah, it also, wow. It also speaks of kind of the normalcy of a lot of this, right? It's the rhythm of life that we see sometimes much more clearly when we're forced to be isolated and not be distracted by everything that life barraged at us, you know? So that's an interesting comment. So these are wonderful comments, and I thank you for them and want to express my appreciation for being invited to facilitate this very important, this very uplifting conversation in light of the horror show that we are living in. And again, it doesn't take away from the horror of what we're going through. It can't, but it can exist side by side with that. And last week during the previous webinar, I quoted a psychiatrist named George Valiant, who did some wonderful research on the psychological development of healthy adults, ages 40 through 80. And he came up with one line, which I think is terribly helpful in times like this. Wisdom is the ability to hold a paradox. I can feel happy and sad at the same time. I could be scared and grateful at the same time. So as we together and apart navigate the COVID-19 pandemic crisis, we can feel both scared and sad and all the stuff that's in that column, and simultaneously feel gratitude, peace, and all the other very, very important emotions and experiences and insights that we have talked about today and also last week. One does not take away the other, they exist side by side. So this has been good. I thank you so much for allowing me the opportunity to facilitate this discussion, and be safe. Please be safe. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike, for your time today and your wonderful part two of this wonderful discussion. We will try to have this posted to the webinar on HLA website at hearingloss.org very soon. We hopefully will continue to have more webinars in the future. We would just ask that you stay posted to hearingloss.org for more updates. And I thank you for your time. Thank you, Dr. Mike, for your time today. And thank you for joining us. Please be safe and please be well. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.